Comedians are usually known for their best bits, but Chris Farley was so much more than just a fat guy in a little coat. This is the story behind the SNL star that was taken too soon. Undoubtedly, one of Farley's most hilarious bits is Fat Guy in a Little Coat. Even in Tommy Boy, a movie that's 90% Farley shtick, it's a standout. In a moment when Richard, played by David Spade, grows exasperated with the buffoonish antics of Tommy, played of course by Chris Farley, Tommy grabs Richard's tiny blazer, puts it on, and chants,
"Fat guy in a little coat, fat guy in a little coat."
It feels like an organic moment, even improvised, but that's probably because it came from Farley and Spade messing around in real life. Spade said during a Reddit Ask Me Anything session that Farley would frequently do the bit. Spade recalled, he would say, "Davey, turn around." And I said, "If this is Fat Guy in a Little Coat, I'm not turning around. It's not funny anymore." And he would say, "No, I've got a whole new thing I'm doing." And then I'd turn around, and it would be him in my Levi jacket, and he would say, "Fat Guy in a Little Coat, don't you give up on it." Actor Bob Odenkirk and Chris Farley were quite the dynamic duo at the famed Second City Comedy Theater. Getting a jump on any NBC-funded collaboration, Odenkirk and Farley created for the Chicago stage the character of Matt Foley, the woefully ineffective, perpetually screaming motivational speaker who tries to scare kids straight by warning them they could wind up just like him.
"I am 35 years old, I am divorced, and I live in a van down by the river."
The name of the character comes from a close friend of Farley's. The real Matt Foley did much better for himself than the fictional one. He and Farley played rugby at Marquette University together. He went on to become a priest in suburban Chicago, and he led Farley's funeral service in 1997. Across his half-decade on Saturday Night Live, Chris Farley established a few recurring characters. The strangest among them was the character Chris Farley. From 1991 to 1993, Chris Farley headlined a sketch called The Chris Farley Show, a mock talk show in which he held nervous, shaky one-on-one conversations with stoic celebrities like Martin Scorsese and Paul McCartney. The questions weren't very probing. Farley would nervously ask the guest if they remembered hugely monumental moments from their career.
"And you were chained to the thing and you couldn't get away?"
Yeah, I remember. Yeah.
That was awesome.
Longtime SNL writer Tom Davis came up with the idea for the Chris Farley Show and developed it with Jim Downey. They were inspired by Farley's behavior around the SNL offices. He'd ask them if they remembered a famous sketch from the 70s and then recreate it for them, right there by himself. Davis and Downey then submitted the sketch's script for consideration as a joke, thinking it was too niche. To their surprise, executive producer Lorne Michaels loved it and placed it into a 1991 episode hosted by Jeff Daniels. Arguably, the most famous Chris Farley Saturday Night Live sketch was Chippendales Audition, airing in 1990. The bit found two men in a dance-off to land the last open spot in the Chippendales dance troupe. The joke was that the guys were played by Hollywood heartthrob and SNL guest host Patrick Swayze and Farley. Swayze's character won, but not before Farley careened shirtless around the stage, his large stomach on display. It's the first SNL sketch where Farley had the main role, and castmate Mike Myers thought it was magical. He said in the documentary, "I Am Chris Farley."
After the Chippendales, we were like, "Oh, this guy's gonna be giant. He's gonna be a huge star."
Future Better Call Saul star Bob Odenkirk was a member of the SNL writing staff at the time, and in his 2022 memoir, Comedy, Drama, he discussed his distaste for Chippendales Audition, then and now. He was disappointed that the sketch got so much attention and praise. I know it confirmed Chris's worst instincts about being funny, which was how he proved his worth, that getting laughed at was as good as getting a laugh. Shame and laughter are synthesized in the worst way. That sketch. Farley's co-star Chris Rock shared a similar sentiment in The Chris Farley Show, calling the sketch out for body-shaming the comic. Rock said, "There's no comic twist to it, it's just mean." 2 years after his termination, Chris Farley returned to Saturday Night Live as a guest host, and it was not an easy week for anyone. Farley was supposed to bring along a sobriety coach, but he instead showed up ready to drink. Apparently, the cast and crew could all tell that Farley was in bad shape. SNL boss Lorne Michaels recalled to Rolling Stone, "He was not in shape the way he had been 5 years earlier, and while I felt good about the show, I think he was spent by airtime." That episode opened with a twisted, but apparently honest, sketch in which Michaels is concerned that Farley is too unstable to host the show. Cast member Tim Meadows reassures him, claiming that Farley has gotten better. Farley then shows up and, to prove his mettle, introduces his sobriety sponsor, Chevy Chase, another former SNL cast member who also struggled mightily with substance abuse. Later in the show, after Farley grew visibly winded during a sketch, Norm Macdonald struck out with a Weekend Update joke. He brushed it off and said,
"That one wasn't very good, but try to laugh anyway because it helps Farley have a little rest."
That SNL episode turned out to be the last time Farley would ever perform for an audience. Farley was a big guy, but he carried himself on screen and on the SNL stage with the grace of an athlete or even a dancer. That made his physical comedy and stunt work all the more impressive. It's probably not too much of a surprise then to learn that young Chris Farley was an extremely talented and accomplished athlete. He was on the heavier side as a child, and despite not having the body one would usually associate with a swimmer, he was positively dolphin-esque. His brother Tom Farley said to Rolling Stone, Chris would get up on the blocks as a 10-year-old and kids would start snickering at him. Then he'd hit the water with those big, broad shoulders of his, go into the butterfly stroke, kicking up this rooster tail, and leave those kids in the dust. Chris Farley did have the traditional build of a football player, and as a high schooler in Madison, Wisconsin, he made the all-city team as a defensive lineman. He had a dream of going pro after school, but when he graduated, he realized that at 5'9" and 230 pounds, he probably wouldn't be big enough to be an effective NFL player. Beneath the humor, Chris Farley often played sensitive, hurt, and even broken characters. Farley also lent a boisterous energy to almost every role he played, and when the cameras weren't rolling, he could apparently be just as wound up as the characters. On an episode of The Late Late Show with James Corden, David Spade recalled that when the cast of Tommy Boy arrived for filming in Toronto, Farley felt under the weather and went to bed early, so Spade went out to grab a drink with co-star Rob Lowe. Farley heard about that innocent friend date, and apparently he was the extremely jealous type. Spade explained that upon returning to set, Farley snidely asked him about his hangout with Rob Lowe. The jealousy then greatly escalated later that day. Spade recalled that during lunch, Farley walked up to him and purposefully stepped on his hand.
And then I got up and threw my Diet Coke on him. It was straight out of like Atlanta Housewives or something.
They fought.
Yeah.
What do you remember?
And then he threw me
of
down the
this?
stairs, and then they
It was
said,
like a proper fight.
Chris Farley was a religious guy throughout his lifetime, raised in the Roman Catholic faith. He was educated in parochial schools according to the Bozo, attending the Catholic-affiliated Marquette University. In his adult life, that spirituality manifested as a commitment to community service. Farley did a lot of hands-on charity work even after he ascended to stardom as one of the most famous and recognizable comedians on the planet. According to the documentary I Am Chris Farley, in his days as a performer with the Second City Improv Troupe, he'd never accept payment for charity shows, saying that his salary should go to whatever charity the performance benefited. After he moved to New York for SNL, Farley frequently volunteered at shelters and unhoused meal centers, and he also made visits to pediatric wards at local hospitals. Most of his closest friends didn't even know that Farley did all that stuff until long after he died. Farley struggled with addictions to drugs and alcohol, and he sadly lost that war on December 18, 1997. The comedian-actor was discovered in his Chicago apartment after reportedly going on a 4-day bender. But Farley wasn't exactly a reckless junkie or a live fast, die young kind of guy. He desperately tried to get clean. In just the last 2 years of his short life, Farley entered rehabilitation facilities 17 times, which is to say nothing of other attempts at a healthier life, such as quitting substances cold turkey, weight loss programs, joining Alcoholics Anonymous and Overeaters Anonymous, and interventions from friends and coworkers. Farley even checked himself into the famous Hazelden Drug Rehab Center in Minneapolis just before his death, but he always struggled to fully quit for long.
You're gonna die from that buddy. You gotta stop. You gotta stop. And it's not gonna end right. And then there you go.
That commitment extended to movie sets. The last film Farley worked on was the adventure comedy Almost Heroes. During the first week of shooting in 1997, Farley was drinking so much that when producers found out, they threatened to shut the movie down. That led Farley to hire a sobriety guard, who hung out with him for the duration of the shoot, making sure he didn't ingest any illicit substances. Producer Denise Denovi even found Alcoholics Anonymous meetings for the actor to attend. Prior to his death, Chris Farley completed his work on Almost Heroes and had several potential movies waiting for him, but there was one other one for which he'd almost finished his work, and it could have combined his fantastic gifts for comic yelling and playing sensitive, misunderstood characters. Farley had been cast in the title role in Shrek, and he'd recorded about 85% of his lines. Production held up for a year while the filmmakers decided what to do, even considering employing a Farley sound-alike to record the final 15% of the dialogue. Finally, producers decided to recast and start over with a brand new actor, Mike Myers, Farley's old Saturday Night Live castmate. Myers' interpretation of the character, which became the foundation of a blockbuster Shrek franchise, was very different from Farley's, as leaked rough footage later showed. Farley's take was much more understated and even dramatic than Myers' broadly comic Scottish accented version. Chris Farley was among the biggest comedy stars in the world when he died in 1997, and he was young, just 33 years old. He likely had a long career in front of him, and his death brought an end to a number of intriguing projects that could have shown Farley was capable of a lot more than just broad physical comedy. He had an interest in starring in a film based on Mordecai Rickler's cult favorite humor novel, The Incomparable Atuk, a satire about an Inuit who leaves Alaska for the first time and experiences culture shock in New York City. Farley also nearly starred in a movie version of A Confederacy of Dunces, the Pulitzer Prize-winning classic novel about an arrogant, overeducated loser living amongst colorful characters in 1960s New Orleans. It's safe to say Farley could have even scored himself some Oscar buzz for another project he had in the works, the starring role in a movie about old-time Hollywood star and scandal magnate Fatty Arbuckle, with a script written by David Mamet. If you or anyone you know is struggling with addiction issues, help is available. Visit the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration website or contact SAMHSA's national helpline at 1-800-662-HELP. That's 1-800-662-4357.